Today is World Suicide Awareness Day, and that might bring up some complicated emotions for listeners. Some of you may know what it's like to want to end your life, and some of you may have lost a loved one to suicide and know the complicated grief that can come with this kind of loss. So today on the show, we're making space for it all. We have a grief counselor with us who says it's important that we take away the stigma, and we do that by talking about suicide, and more importantly, that we talk about hope.
You are not too broken to get better. You are not a failure for wanting help, and you are not alone. I stand by you. We all stand by you every day, and know that it's okay to not be okay.
We have some really special guests today on the show who are sharing their own journeys of moving through pain into a place where they can now help others. If you have a story that you would like to share, today we're asking you to connect through email, bluesky@cbc.ca. And if today's show is difficult and you find yourself needing help, the National 24/7 Suicide Crisis Hotline is 988. This is the new 3-digit helpline that provides urgent life support by phone and text to people in every province and territory across the country. So again, that's 988, and I'll be sure to share that number throughout the show. Now, our guest today says talking about suicide is important. Jennifer Yanowski is Director of Education and Outreach with Caring Hearts Grief Support and Counseling. Caring Hearts is leading an event tonight in Regina for Suicide Awareness and Prevention Day. But first, she has graciously agreed to join us in our Regina studio. Jennifer, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate being able to have this conversation. And I want to know more about why you think it's so important that we talk about suicide.
I think a lot of people have been touched by suicide, either in their own families or their communities or their friend groups, or somebody in the office whose family member maybe died by suicide, or maybe they've experienced it in their own families. It's so prevalent, and we don't talk enough about it. So I think it's very important for us to start the conversation and continue the conversation.
Why haven't we talked about it? Why is it so difficult to talk about?
I think that there's this misconception about how if we talk about suicide, it's almost like inviting it into the room, and it's not true. I think that the more we talk about it, the more we support people who've been touched by suicide, and the more we support families and bring this conversation out into the open, the more awareness we can bring to it and the more helps we can give people who are struggling, because they're not alone, and there's a lot of helps out there, but we need to have the conversation so that they know they're not alone.
I'm wondering about how we have that conversation. Like, I know in the media, we're really careful about how we report on suicide. And, we've got some pretty strict guidelines on what we share and what we don't, and trying to avoid copycat behavior. So I'm wondering if you can help us understand that aspect of it. What's the thinking behind that, or what would be your perspective on that? Whether or not we're doing it right, I'm not sure, but just what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's mostly a cultural thing. If you think back in our history, there's been certain subjects that we've always been reluctant to talk about. I mean, just a few years ago, it was really not very common for us to talk about divorce in public. But now we have support groups and care groups and people who go through it and support each other. And so it's something that's part of our culture. It's something we brought with us from the past, and I think it just is something that we have to get rid of. I understand that there's details that you don't want to talk about, and absolutely copycat behavior is a thing, and that's unfortunate. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about suicide. Mental health and mental health support is so incredibly important in this day and age, and for our students, for our young people, and for our older people too. Well, another misconception is that suicide is only for young people, and it's not. It's something, I think the most prevalent age right now for suicide is middle-aged men, which strikes people as odd, but we're not talking about it enough, so we need to know more.
So this is part of what you do. You bring people together to talk, to help with their healing, and to bring it out in the open, to help that process, that journey, right, to healing. So tell me about what Caring Hearts does as an organization to support that.
Okay, well, Caring Hearts is an education center, but it's also a counseling center. We do group therapy, and we engage with government and do different programs that support the community. So we have individual counseling, we have group counseling, we have sharing circles that are led by an elder, and we have education that we could take across the province on a variety of topics. Complicated grief and compounding grief is one of them that we take out to a lot of different communities, but also trauma. How to survive trauma, how trauma impacts us, and trauma-informed care. How do you work with people who've been through trauma? So those are some of the things that Caring Hearts does. And we don't specifically work with suicide, but we do counseling for people who've been through it or whose families have been through it. And we do education in the form of trauma and trauma awareness. And we have a suicide group that is run through the government where we work with the government, and it's where families can get together and discuss things that could be helpful, and the government listens. And so the 988 number is one of the things that has come out of that group. And so it's important for us to keep doing this work. And so that's a little bit about what Caring Hearts does.
You had people together just last night, right? You had a suicide loss support group last night?
That's correct. We have an ongoing suicide loss support group. And so we are currently in the middle of a group. And so if people want to be part of this group, they can call in and get registered for the next group. We're probably going to be running another one in November.
Can you share an example of something that you've learned from someone in this group or one of the groups that maybe surprised you? I know that this is the work that you do, but we're always learning from one another, right? So is there something that stands out to you that might be useful to share with others through the conversations that you've had?
Honestly, I think the thing that stands out to me the most is that this is something that impacts so many people. And we don't talk about it enough, but it impacts so many people. Like it's crazy to me how many people have been through this and how many families have been through this and how many communities are struggling with this. There are some communities that in the last month have lost like over a dozen people, not necessarily to suicide, but through complex grief and loss from a variety of deaths, suicide being one of them. And it's just overwhelming for them, and they just don't even know where to start, and they don't know who to reach out to, and they don't know what kind of helps to get in. And so that kind of lack of awareness was also an eye-opener for me.
I want to share with people one of the conversations that I've had in the days leading up to this. So Tiana Whitfield knows what it's like to have that feeling of hopelessness. She started experiencing suicidal thoughts at the age of 13, and she did try killing herself multiple times. Thankfully, Tiana has moved through those very dark days and has turned her sadness and grief into something positive. Tiana is now in her third year of social work. She's one of the people speaking at a World Suicide Awareness event this evening in Regina. And so I caught up with her earlier and I asked her to take us back in time to when she first started thinking about suicide.
Yeah, so I would have never guessed that 10 years ago I'd be standing here today. Let alone sharing my story and journey of depression, anxiety, and what has led me to, or what had led me to attempt suicide a few times. So I guess during those days of those dark and lonely days, I struggled for silence and for a long time. And from the outside, I appeared to be outgoing, friendly, and fun, but that didn't accurately depict what I was going through inside. I got to the point, go ahead.
What were you going through on the inside? Just describe that for us.
So I was severely depressed. I was anxious. I isolated myself. I had some dark thoughts. And I just felt very alone. A little bit of what I was feeling inside.
Why do you think you felt so alone? Maybe tell us a bit about where you were living and how that may have contributed to that feeling of being alone.
Yeah, for sure. So I, at the time, was living in Estevan, Saskatchewan. And at that age, there were little supports for me. And if I did have the supports, there was long wait lists. So I would get admitted to the hospital because I had suicidal thoughts. And they would, keep me for a day and then send me on my merry way home. No supports to reach out to after I left the hospital. And over again, that just seemed to happen. So I felt like giving up. I was alone in the thought of nobody can help me. There's nothing they can do. I can't wait on this wait list. I need help immediately. And that's what led me to the few suicide attempts that I had. And that's what actually got me to a point that I was admitted and immediately directed to a therapist. It wasn't until those points that I had attempted suicide that I got those supports immediately, which was very frustrating and obviously could have lost my life.
Yeah. Had you ever known someone who had died by suicide before?
Yes. I had two cousins. So, yeah.
When you finally got the support that you needed, what did that look like?
So, because of the third attempt, they were taking it very seriously. I actually went into Weyburn Psych Ward, and that was the last attempt to save me. So at a young age, I was at that time 16, and it was a hard journey. I didn't want to go. I was leaving behind my family. I was in an unfamiliar place, and I had none of my belongings with me. In those moments of being in the psych ward, I really had to challenge myself and dig deeper into what was going on in my mind and how to better myself from there.
How did you better yourself? Did medication play a role? Did you end up with a support team that helped you through all that?
Yeah, so I was on medication during that time. I was set up with a therapist and a psychologist, and I went through that. After getting out of the psych ward, I was set up with those supports for quite some time, and that had helped me. But a lot of it came with working on myself personally. And it is frustrating. It takes time. And sometimes you don't have the answers within yourself. And one thing I just kept repeating to myself is to never give up, and that there is hope, and that I'm not alone. And once I had that realization and able to repeat that to myself daily, that there are supports out there, even if it's hard to reach, just reach out.
You're now taking that message and that story and sharing it with others because you're now in social work. And so you will work with people who have also thought about suicide. How do you think your perspective, your story could help others who are experiencing something similar?
So that is one of the main reasons why I decided to go into social work. I really want to focus on ending that stigma and advocating for individuals and bringing that awareness. I also want to be able to have a voice for people who may not have that voice for themselves. I I speak every year at Journey to Hope. And some of the few things that I say is talking openly is not just real. It is necessary. And it needs to be spoken about to bring awareness of the mental health crisis we are going through as a society. And this is why it is critical to have an open conversation about suicide and mental health illness. Open dialogue has to start somewhere, and my somewhere starts now, with being involved with Journey to Hope and as a future social worker. I'm still a good person. I'm still kind, intelligent, and brave, but I'm also so gifted with the insight, the ability to forgive, and to be a helper as a social worker. And I appreciate my ability to relate to others on many levels and be open-minded. I also have a mental illness, but it does not define me, and it is part of my story, and I am proud of that.
Maybe something you can leave us with is something specific that you would like to be stated in some of those conversations, because they can seem maybe somewhat abstract to people who haven't lived it the way you've lived it. And so as a society, we're moving towards being more open about mental illness. We're talking about suicide today on the show. But what specifically do you want said in those conversations that can help move things forward and keep people healthy and safe?
That's a difficult question for me to answer. I want others, I mean, there's lots of supports out there, but it really all depends on the person. And knowing that there's no shame of having a mental illness or having suicide ideation, being brave, knowing that your life, your circumstances, your situation may be dark right now, but there is a possibility and there will be a light. I'm not quite sure, or maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but also learn the signs and symptoms, urge people to seek help, look for warning signs. People with depression may not know or admit that they're depressed. So having that awareness for others around you that you love and care about. People often feel ashamed about their depression and suicide ideation, and mistakenly believe that they should be able to overcome it with willpower alone. But depression seldom gets better without treatment or medication, and may get worse. So with the right treatment and medication or whatever that person may need, it can get better. But also understand the suicide risk. So people with depression are at an increased risk of suicide. And if a person is severely depressed, they may feel suicidal at some point. So take all those signs in of suicidal behavior and act immediately. Show support, and remember that depression isn't anyone's fault. You can't fix someone's depression, but your support and understanding can help.
Deanna, you were helping people. There were people listening today who heard every word you said. I thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say one last note here to all the people listening, and offer that support and a listening ear, is that you are not too broken to get better. You are not a failure for wanting help, and you are not alone. I stand by you. We all stand by you every day, and know that it's okay to not be okay.
Thank you, Tiana.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Tiana Whitfield is sharing her experience at a suicide awareness event in Regina. It's at 6 o'clock tonight in Central Park. That's at 15th and Scar Street. If you find yourself struggling and in need of help, the national 24/7 Suicide Crisis Hotline is 988. You can contact people by phone or by text, and there is someone there, and people can access this in every province and territory right across the country. And so that Suicide Crisis Hotline is 988. One of our guests today is Jennifer Yanowski, Director of Education and Outreach with Caring Hearts, Grief Support and Counseling. Today is Suicide Awareness Day, all month actually, and so it's opening the door for these really important conversations. Just listening to Tiana again, reminded of just how important it is, and to see a beautiful person like her be so open about what she's gone through. I just think, how can that not have an impact? So we'll ask Jennifer a few more questions about the day and what she hopes we will continue to talk about. I'm Lisa Grabinski. You're listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1, 94.1 FM in Saskatoon, 102.5 FM in Regina, 540 AM across the province, or streaming live. You can also find our shows on demand by downloading the CBC Listen app. Now, Jennifer Yanowski is with us today. Jennifer, you were listening to Tiana share her story. I'm wondering what stood out to you?
I think what stood out for me the most about her story is just the empathy that she has for people who are going through what she went through. It's a difficult journey, and nobody wants to be on it. Nobody wants to have to go through that, but she really struggled and persevered, and the empathy that she has and the desire to use her life and her work to help others is just phenomenal and just so heartwarming. So yeah, kudos to her. She's doing a great job.
Yeah. You work with a range of people, so it could be people like Tiana in that age bracket, but you also work with a lot of like young people and kids, right? Can you talk about how you support young people who may have experienced a death by suicide?
Absolutely. We have a connection with Joshua Tree, which is a learning center, and they help us to put on a youth camp twice a year. So we have one coming up in October, at the very beginning of October. I think it's October 6th. And we also have one in May, so we just passed one. And this camp is for youth who have gone through loss and are struggling with the grieving process. And what we're finding more and more is that these youth are really struggling through complex grief, a lot of it with suicide. And so they have seen family members and have walked through this process with family. And so they're struggling understanding this grief. And it, of course, this kind of grief is complex and hard anyways, no matter how old you are, but for little kids, it's just something that they can't wrap their heads around. So we support them through that, and we do a lot to prepare for that, for those days, and to really reach out to families so that they know that they're not alone, that they can get their little ones help.
What kind of words, what language do you use to talk to kids about this?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think when we're talking to kids about grief in general, we have to give them the words. Kids, they don't know the emotions that they're feeling. They don't have words for it. Kids know angry, sad, mad, and happy, and we need to help them with the emotions. And so we get them talking, and we help them to name their emotions and what are they experiencing, and then we validate it. It's okay, that's good that you're going through that. And it's okay that you're going through that. And you're not alone going through that. And this is something that unfortunately lots of families have walked through. And so there's lots of supports there. So just letting them know that they're not alone and helping them with the language around it so that they can express themselves. Little kids so often just haven't got the words to express themselves, and so they feel as though they're not heard and nobody is listening to them. But we want them to know that we're here to listen.
Yeah, kids don't have the words, but sometimes neither do the adults, right?
Exactly.
I think that's part of the reason why we struggle so much with this. And I think there's a lot of worry about saying the wrong thing. I'm wondering if you can speak to that, just how to approach conversations. You want to support people through this journey, but you don't want to say the wrong thing.
So like all grief journeys, this one is hard, but it's specifically hard because families feel a stigma around it. I think what we have to remember is that the cliches are not going to help. this too shall pass, there's a silver lining around every crowd, those sorts of things. We just need to leave the cliches alone. And not, if we don't know what to say, it's okay not to say anything at all. One of the most profound things that I ever heard from somebody who was grieving the loss of a child is that the best support that they had was when another person came up beside them and just linked arms with them and was just there with them and present in that moment. And just having that support, somebody to hold the space with them and to be present. And that, I think we underestimate how powerful that is. We may not have the words and we may not be able to make it better. In fact, you can't make this better. Nothing you say is going to make them feel better. And we want to make them feel better. And so we strive to find something to say. But it's okay just to acknowledge their loss and to let them know that you're there for them, no matter what they're going through.
How often do people share with you that their friends aren't present? Like if you experience a death like this, I'm guessing that people can feel very alone, and the supports they thought they had maybe aren't showing up. Does that happen?
It happens with all loss, but it happens especially with suicide. People, because they don't know what to say and they don't want to make it worse, they don't say anything, and they walk away, and they don't reach out, and they ghost their friends, and it's not okay because they don't know what to say. So out of a fear of not knowing, they say nothing. And a lot of people feel isolated when something like this happens. They feel as though they're the only ones that have gone through this. So even though you may not have personally gone through this, even letting them know that you're there for them and that you understand that this is a very difficult time, and that and just being with them in that space and listening to them, that's really all we have to do. We don't have to say anything special or try to solve their hurts, because we can't.
Yeah. This leads nicely into our next guest, because she's there listening to a lot of people right now, and she's been that support person for people in her community of Meadow Lake. And so Alicia LaHoo is the executive director of Positively Parenting in Meadow Lake, and they run a monthly suicide loss support group in that community. I had the chance to catch up with Alicia earlier to find out why she started this group.
Well, within our organization, we're a nonprofit group who has been around for over 25 years. We always try to gauge the community year to year through an independent evaluation to see what gaps there are in the community and make sure that we're never doing a duplication of services. And this was a group that was highly needed for our area and the surrounding areas, because suicide is so prevalent. So that's kind of why we decided to start this group last year. And we have people travel from outside communities to attend as well. So we're just very fortunate to be able to offer it.
When something like suicide is so prevalent in a community like yours, what is the ripple effect of that? Like, what told you that there was a need for this group based on what you were seeing in your community?
Well, especially in our area, it's so prevalent, but when a community is impacted by suicide, there is that ripple effect. You know someone or know of someone that has been impacted by suicide, and it's not just those close loved ones. It's kind of felt throughout the community, and especially when it puts others, family members, friends, in a vulnerable situation. So it's so important to have a group specific to suicide loss to provide those supports, because suicide grief is very unique. It can be very complicated, and often we find that there's still that stigma associated with it, right? Suicide is really hard to talk about. People, when they're offering condolences and they may have heard that suicide was involved, it makes it awkward. Do I say something? Do I not say something? Is it taboo? So it kind of feels like you're left isolated, not really able to talk about it or seek the support you can feel quite alone when going through a loss like that. And with a suicide loss, there's often higher levels of shame, guilt, rejection, abandonment, all of those things, because there's so many questions that may be left unanswered, right? For a lot of loss and death, if someone is sick or there's been a fatal car accident or things like that, often there are answers. We have tangible answers that we can hang on to. But with suicide, often it comes as a shock, and lots of times people just never get the answers that they're seeking.
You know a lot of this, obviously, because of the work that you do, but because you have personal experience, suicide has touched your family. Are you comfortable sharing with us how that's had an impact on you?
Yeah, we felt that it was really important for the facilitator of our group to have lived experience because it is so unique. So obviously, when I was first affected personally by a suicide, I wasn't ready to lead a group, but now I am. Sadly, my own father took his life, and it adds a whole nother element, right? Than what you learn in a book, what you learn through your degree. When you go through it personally, there's a whole nother side to it that, you really can only understand when you've went through something like that.
How long ago was that, Alicia?
That was in 2021.
So not very long ago.
Yeah. No. And, when you're working with people who have had a suicide loss, to feel those emotions and those things going through it yourself, you get a better understanding of all of the things that you might feel, right? And the things that aren't talked about. And people feel that shame. They're scared to talk about it. For example, one of the things that you may feel if you have been watching your loved one struggle, right? There's just been no reprieve for them. And it's just a constant battle. That relief that you may feel is so confusing because obviously you always want your loved one around. You want them there with you forever. But when their pain stops, sometimes there can be those conflicting emotions. Like you're so mad and angry and can't understand why it came to this, but also that little bit of relief. And then how do you process those feelings? You feel like a terrible person. You feel, how can I be feeling this? Was it my fault? Did I manifest this? There's just so many things and complex grief that come along with this kind of loss.
What helped you get to the point now where you feel like you can lead a support group?
Well, I practice what I preach. Obviously, counseling support groups, I'm very biased. I think they're wonderful resources in our community, and that's exactly what I did. I got some additional counseling, and I did join a grief loss support group myself. So I could be with others who would have an understanding, and I could just be in a safe space where I could process.
And I'm assuming you find yourself still processing. Like there's not an end point in this journey, is there?
No, there's not. And that's the key, right? When people join support groups, they think, okay, I'm going to just check this box and I'm going to get over it. Well, grief isn't something that you get over, right? We can learn to cope. We can learn to have a quality of life. We can learn to celebrate our loved ones. Because so often with death, and especially suicide loss, people don't want to bring up that person because they think, well, it's going to remind us of something, of their suicide. But no, we want to hear about them. We want to hear the stories. We want to celebrate them. It's part of the healing journey, right? But with that stigma, with a suicide, often that gets left behind and that is left out. So just the awkwardness, the unknowing, people don't want to talk about it, but we need to. And we know that grief isn't linear, right? You don't go through like guilt, shame, anger, fear, all these checks of boxes, and you never have to deal with it again. We know that they're going to come up, and this is part of the group, what we do, we talk about on the anniversary of the suicide. What does that look like? What are the supports you have in place? Is that a day where you're going to celebrate the person? Is this a day where you want to be alone? Is this a day where you know that you need your people, your supports to rally around you? We talk about those things: birthdays, Christmases, the first holiday without your loved one. So many things that come up after a loss. So those are just some of the things that we discuss in group.
Your lived experience goes beyond being a family member of a loved one who died by suicide, but you also have personal experience with your own struggles. Do you talk about that in the group? Are you able to share with us that part of you that you bring to this group?
Yes, absolutely. I did have suicide ideation as a youth growing up, especially compounded with a OCD diagnosis. So I talk about that. So many times where people feel that not so much that they're leaning into death or wanting to end their life, but they want the pain to end, right? There's a finality to it. And that's why we know that sometimes we hear from families, I don't understand. I thought my loved one was getting better. They seem so happy in the weeks leading up to their suicide. But we find that, right? People who make that decision find that little bit of reprieve, and they know or think that their pain is going to end. So, it does lift them up as they're maybe going about saying their goodbyes without other people knowing. All of those important things that, need to be talked about, especially with family members who may be vulnerable after a suicide, because we know it does put people at a higher risk.
It does. That is something that you're aware of, that if somebody has experienced the loss, the death of someone else by suicide, that increases their risk.
Absolutely. And that's why these groups who are specific to suicide loss are so important, because the facilitator needs to be trained, one, to navigate the group, to create those parameters around safety and confidentiality, but also to watch people, right? And make sure at the end of the group, when we're talking about hard things, that we do a check-in, we do a debriefing. Is everyone safe to go home? How are you feeling now? We also want to make sure that members not explicitly discuss the means or methods of a suicide, because we know that can be a really big trigger for people, right? When you hear that, you hear it, you have those images in your head, it can trigger you, and that can bring a lot of trauma. So we want to make sure that those kind of things aren't talked about in group. So it's a fine line in navigating that and just making sure that everyone is in that safe space.
How are you doing, Alicia, knowing everything that you've just shared with us and knowing that you yourself might be at increased risk as you process the grief, just all of that? How have you made sure that are you okay? How are you staying okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would never put myself in that situation in the group. I made sure, and that wasn't just a decision by myself. I am surrounded by a great team who I debrief with. We have a wonderfully skilled program manager here that is constantly checking in, making sure that I'm doing okay, kind of knows the signs. And absolutely, I know that if I'm not the best person to lead that group at that time, we bring someone else in, Yeah.
What kind of...
And that may happen from time to time.
Yeah, it may, hey? Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of a difference do you think this group has made for your community?
Huge. Just, it's an open group, so you don't have to pre-register. We offer it once a month, so you can come as often as you need. You can miss a month. It's whatever you need it to look like. And the other important thing about this group is we meet people where they're at, right? Everyone is going to be in a different place in their journey that they're going to. Some people want to come in to group and talk. Some just want to be there in that safe space. And that's exactly what we do. We hold space for people. We never put them on the spot. If they just want to come and be surrounded with others who have experienced the same kind of grief, that's what we do. And another really important thing about group is we never compare grief, right? We hear this all the time, right? Oh, you lost your child. Well, I only lost so-and-so, right? We don't do that. We never compare because it's all relative to that person. We're all feeling it exactly the same. So just those things in the group that we navigate through to make sure that everyone is there, belongs there, is welcomed. There's no hierarchy in group. And it really is just holding space and walking along everyone together.
The group is very lucky to have you, Alicia. Thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Alicia LaHoo is the Executive Director of Positively Parenting in Meadow Lake. She runs a monthly suicide loss support group in that community. With us today in our Regina studio is Jennifer Yanowski, Director of Education and Outreach with Caring Hearts Grief Support. We've both been listening to that conversation with Alicia. Jennifer, what are you thinking about as you heard Alicia? I mean, she shared so much. There was so much in that interview to take away.
There is. She has a lot of strength and a lot of determination to use her own experiences to help others. It's a theme that I hear over and over again with people who have survived suicide attempts and people who have family members who've completed suicide, is this desire to reach out and help others, to be there for others, to hold space for others, and to help others through this process. Just being able to provide a space where people can feel safe and be able to feel as though they can come and share their story and, more importantly, what they're going through right now. It's so complex, and it's so good to be able to get all of that out in the open in a place where people understand. So for her to be able to do that is just fantastic.
You know, thinking of how to bring this topic and to create an openness around it and to create more spaces for us to be open about it. Keith sent us an email. So Keith writes, many people are scared to talk about death and suicide. We need to bring these conversations into our schools along with many other taboo subjects. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. One of the things that I have done in the past, and it's one of the highlights of my year, is there's a school in Regina that I go to once a year in May, and they have a wellness day. And on that wellness day, they have a variety of different presenters who are presenting a whole bunch of different ways that kids can have wellness in their life. And so there might be somebody talking about exercise, there might be a drumming group, there might be yoga happening, there might be people talking about meditation and how it's helpful to calm down when you meditate. And I go and I talk about grief. And so I love the fact that we are starting to bring this out into the open and to have kids know that it's okay to have a safe space to talk, to have the words connected to how they're feeling, and to be allowed to just express themselves. There's so much happening in our community, and there's so much happening around Saskatchewan. And Saskatchewan is of all the provinces, not including the territories, but of all the provinces, Saskatchewan's the highest suicide rate per capita. And there's so much that's concerning about that. And there's also a lot of hope when you hear what's happening around in our communities and how many people are starting just little things that will make a difference.
Your job must be very difficult, Jennifer, and I can see how you would hold on to those moments of hope, right? And to look for that. But how do you do it? What keeps you motivated to do this hard work?
It is hard work, and it's because it's emotionally hard. So there's physical hard work, there's mental hard work, and then there's emotionally hard work. And emotionally hard work is very taxing. And one of the things that we teach at Caring Hearts, one of the things that I teach when I go out into community, is resilience and self-care. And what does that look like? I always say it's not just massages and pedicures. Resilience and self-care is learning, it's doing the hard work, it's finding people to talk to, it's taking care of your mental health, it's seeking help when you feel helpless, it's choosing hope, because hope isn't something that magically happens. You have to choose it and you have to seek it. And I have seen hope in communities that have lost so much. I went out to one community, and in the first 2 months of 2023, they had lost 15 people for a variety of reasons, suicide being one of them. And when I stood in that auditorium and I was teaching them and talking with them and hearing their stories, I felt hope. And I know that they felt it too. Hope is something we can choose. And so with this work, we have to find those moments where we're making a difference and people are feeling like they're supported.
Jennifer, thank you so much for everything you shared with us today. I just so value this show and this conversation that I've had with you, and hearing from Tiana and Alicia today too. It just means the world. So thank you.
You are welcome, and thank you so much for doing this. This is a really good start to an amazing journey, so thank you very much.
Yeah. Jennifer Yanowski is Director of Education and Outreach with Caring Hearts Grief Support and Counseling. If you find yourself struggling, there is a number you could call or text 988. That is the Suicide Crisis Hotline. There are people there who will text you, will talk to you. It's available for urgent live support by phone and text to people in every province and territory across the country. Again, that is 988. We're going to leave you with some words of hope from Tiana.
You are not too broken to get better. You are not a failure for wanting help, and you are not alone. I stand by you. We all stand by you every day, and know that it's okay to not be okay.